streets and close-knit community, there was a home that many admired, a family many respected. Within that home lived Rabbi Fred Neulander and his wife Carol, a woman known for her kindness, her warmth, and her dedication to her family and faith. Together, they seemed to embody the ideals that so many looked up to, a marriage built on shared values, a life marked by service, and a deep connection to the community. Before we begin, if you're fascinated by stories of hidden lives and the shocking secrets that lie beneath the surface, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We uncover real-life cases that reveal the unexpected, the tragic, and the unforgettable. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And as you listen today, let us know your thoughts. How would you have responded if you were in the Neulander family's shoes? Leave your comments below. Now, let's dive into the story of the Neulander family, a tale that shows just how deceptive appearances can be. But on a November night in 1994, that facade would shatter. Carol Neulander, the rabbi's beloved wife, was found brutally murdered in her own home. To the outside world, it seemed impossible. How could a life so steady, so ordinary, come to such a violent end? As the investigation unfolded, detectives found themselves peeling back layers of a life that wasn't as simple as it appeared. Behind closed doors, secrets had taken root, ones that no one in Cherry Hill could have suspected. These secrets, buried under years of routine and reputation, would lead authorities down a path that would reveal betrayal, hidden passions, and a deadly plot. A plan so meticulously concealed that it took years to uncover the truth. The question on everyone's mind was the same. What really happened to Carol Neulander? What could drive someone so close to her to orchestrate such a cold and calculated act? This is the story of a murder that shook an entire community to its core. It's a story of deception, of desire, and of a carefully constructed life that masked a truth more horrifying than anyone could imagine. As we dig into the details, we'll reveal how one woman's life was cut short and how the person she trusted most became the architect of her demise. Stay with us as we delve into the shocking events leading up to that night and the web of lies that was woven around Carol Neulander. This is a journey into the darkest corners of a seemingly perfect life, and a cautionary tale about the secrets that can lie hidden in even the most trusted hearts. Cherry Hill, New Jersey, a place that seemed to epitomize the American dream. Located just a short drive from Philadelphia, this peaceful suburb was home to families who sought a life of comfort and community, a place where people felt safe and neighbors knew one another by name. Its streets were lined with neatly kept homes and manicured lawns, and for many, Cherry Hill was more than a place. It was a promise of stability, a refuge from the chaos of the world beyond. In this quiet town, there was one place that stood as a pillar of the community. The congregation Makor Shalom. For years, this synagogue had been a center for faith, a gathering place for families, and a cornerstone of Jewish life in Cherry Hill. And at the heart of Makor Shalom was Rabbi Fred Neulander. To the people of Cherry Hill, Fred Neulander was more than a rabbi. He was a figure of compassion, a man who had dedicated his life to guiding others through faith. With his eloquent sermons and unwavering devotion to his congregation, Fred was deeply respected, not just as a religious leader, but as a counselor, a friend, and an inspiration. Families turned to him for advice, support, and reassurance. He was there at their weddings, their baby namings, and even their most difficult moments. For the congregation, Fred Neulander was someone they trusted implicitly. Beside him stood Carol Neulander, Fred's devoted wife. Carol was known for her warmth and kindness, a woman whose presence brought light to those around her. As a mother of three, she was deeply committed to her family and took great pride in her role within the community. Carol ran a popular local bakery, Classic Cake, which had become a beloved fixture in Cherry Hill. Customers admired her not only for her business but for her friendliness and her readiness to help others. People described Carol as loyal, supportive, and dedicated, a true partner to Fred, both in their family life and in his work as a rabbi. To everyone in Cherry Hill, Fred and Carol Neulander appeared to have it all: a loving marriage, a close-knit family, and a respected place in the community. They were seen as a model couple, pillars of both faith and virtue. Friends and neighbors admired their relationship, their shared dedication to family, and their commitment to service. Together, they were a picture of stability, embodying the values that many held dear. But beneath this surface of respectability, there were cracks, subtle, almost imperceptible at first, yet present all the same. There were whispers that something wasn't quite right. Some in the community sensed a tension between Fred and Carol, but the truth was far more complicated and far more disturbing than anyone could have anticipated. For while Carol remained dedicated to her family and her community, Fred had secrets. Secrets that would ultimately unravel the life they had built together. Secrets that would lead to a chain of events no one in Cherry Hill could have predicted. And as the truth began to emerge, the community would come to realize that the couple they thought they knew were living a life built on deception, hidden motives, and unspoken desires. This is the story of Carol Neulander's tragic end and the lengths her husband, a man of faith, would go to protect the secrets he harbored. Join us as we step back into Cherry Hill, a community that would never be the same after the shocking events that would soon unfold. Fred and Carol Neulander appeared, from all outward appearances, to have a partnership built on respect, shared values, and faith. Married for over 2 decades, they had raised 3 children together and had cultivated an image of stability and integrity. To the public, they were a well-respected couple, a rabbi and his devoted wife, bound by the tenets of faith and family. Fred's role as a rabbi at Congregation Makor Shalom placed him in a position of moral authority. People sought his advice, trusted his words, and saw him as a beacon of guidance and reliability. Carol, too, was a figure of admiration. Known for her kindness, she was someone who people in Cherry Hill felt comfortable around. Her dedication extended beyond her family and her role as a rabbi's wife. She was an entrepreneur, the owner of a popular bakery called Classic Cake. Her bakery was more than a business. It was a staple in the community, a place where locals gathered to enjoy the treats she and her staff crafted with care. Through her work, Carol earned a loyal following and was known as a woman who valued hard work and hospitality. Friends, customers, and neighbors often spoke of her generosity, her steady smile, and her unwavering support for those she cared about. Together, Fred and Carol represented a life of purpose and connection, a couple whose relationship inspired admiration and respect. Yet behind closed doors, Fred Neulander was leading a double life. In the privacy of his personal world, Fred was a different man. A man wrestling with his own desires that were hidden from the congregation he guided and the family who depended on him. In 1992, Fred crossed paths with a woman who would change the course of his life, and ultimately his wife's fate. A Philadelphia radio personality named Elaine Sonsini. Elaine was well known in her own right. She had a successful career in radio and was admired for her wit, charm, and distinctive voice. For years, her voice had filled the homes and cars of thousands of listeners across Philadelphia, and she was a woman who commanded attention. When Fred met Elaine, it was in a setting where he was, once again, the figure of authority, a rabbi known for his wisdom and poise. But this meeting would spark something in Fred, something that he couldn't ignore. The affair between Fred Neulander and Elaine Sonsini began in secret. To the outside world, Fred was still the committed rabbi, husband, and father. But behind the scenes, he was leading a life that directly contradicted the values he preached. He and Elaine met in private, keeping their relationship hidden from the community and from Carol. For Fred, Elaine represented an escape from the responsibilities and image he had carefully constructed over the years. With her, he felt free. Free from the expectations of his role, free from the constraints of his marriage. But this freedom came at a cost. As their affair deepened, Fred found himself growing more and more entangled in a web of deception. Maintaining the facade of a devoted husband and spiritual leader became a burden. Yet the thought of leaving Carol, of dismantling the life they had built, seemed unimaginable. To his congregation, Fred was a man who embodied moral clarity and compassion. To Elaine, he was someone entirely different, a man willing to risk everything for the thrill of something new. For Carol, the signs of Fred's secret life were not yet visible. She continued her work at the bakery, attended synagogue services, and supported her husband in his role. But Fred's affair had already set in motion a series of events that would ultimately lead to betrayal and heartbreak. The choices he made in the shadows of his marriage began to carve a path that he couldn't turn back from, a path that would lead to an end more tragic than anyone could have foreseen. As Fred struggled to keep his two lives separate, the pressures mounted. He was living on the edge, knowing that at any moment the truth could surface. And when it did, the life he had so carefully built would come crashing down. But instead of stepping away, instead of confessing or seeking resolution, Fred would make a choice, one that would forever alter the lives of everyone around him. This is the story of how a rabbi, bound by vows of faith and commitment, found himself ensnared by his own actions, leading his family and his community toward a devastating tragedy. By 1994, Fred Neulander's double life had become a relentless burden. His affair with Elaine Sonsini had grown deeper, and with every passing day, Fred felt more torn between the life he had built with Carol and the new life he wanted with Elaine. To Fred, there seemed to be only one way to free himself from this tangled web, one drastic measure that, in his mind, could clear the path to the life he desired. It was an idea so extreme that few would have believed him capable of even considering it. Yet, Fred had made a decision. Carol had to be eliminated. It was a chilling notion for a man of faith, a man who had built his life and reputation on the ideals of compassion and morality. But to Fred, the stakes were high, and his mind had twisted his love for Elaine and the promise of freedom into something dark, something dangerous. He began to search for someone who could make Carol's death appear as nothing more than a tragic accident or a crime of opportunity. It was in this desperate search that he met Len Genoff. Len Genoff was a private investigator, a man whose life had also been marked by a series of questionable choices and a struggle to make ends meet. Vulnerable and enticed by the promise of money, Len agreed to Fred's plan. But Len couldn't do it alone. Needing assistance, he recruited Paul Daniels, another man who found himself drawn into this web by the allure of a quick payday. Together, Len Genoff and Paul Daniels formed a deadly pact, bound by money and motivated by Fred's growing desperation. The plan was simple, but ruthless. Fred instructed them to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, a crime that would leave no suspicion pointing back to him. And as November 1st, 1994 approached, the pieces of the plan began to fall into place. On that cold November night, Carol Neulander was alone in her home. The air was quiet, the neighborhood still, as Len and Paul prepared to carry out the crime that would forever alter the lives of so many. They entered the Neulander home, their minds set on the task at hand, and confronted Carol. It was a brutal, merciless act. Carol Neulander, the woman who had devoted her life to her family, to her community, had no chance to defend herself. She was beaten repeatedly, left with fatal injuries that spoke of nothing but violence and cruelty. And as her life slipped away, Len and Paul staged the scene to appear as though it had been a botched robbery. They left the house in disarray, items scattered around to give the impression of a break-in gone wrong. A senseless act of violence in an otherwise quiet neighborhood. When Fred returned home that evening and discovered Carol's body, the horror he projected was convincing. He called the police, his voice filled with panic, claiming he had come home to find his wife dead. His home, a crime scene. To his neighbors and the authorities, he seemed every bit the devastated husband, a man who had just lost his wife in a horrific act of violence. But as investigators would soon discover, the truth behind Carol Neulander's death was far from what it appeared to be. While Fred played the part of the grieving husband, his carefully constructed facade was already beginning to crack. The seeds of his deception had been planted. And as the days passed, suspicions would grow, ultimately leading investigators down a path of betrayal, manipulation, and calculated murder. This was only the beginning of a case that would shock Cherry Hill and unearth the chilling truth about Fred Neulander's plan to kill his own wife, all to pursue the life he believed he deserved. But the cracks in his story would soon become impossible to ignore, and as investigators began to piece together the events of that fateful night, Fred's carefully crafted lies would start to unravel, one by one. When police arrived at the Neulander home on November 1st, 1994, they were met with a scene of chaos. Carol Neulander lay lifeless, surrounded by signs of what looked like a botched robbery. The home was in disarray, items scattered and misplaced, as if the intruders had left in a hurry. To the untrained eye, it appeared to be a tragic crime of opportunity, a home invasion gone wrong. But for the detectives on the scene, something didn't feel right. As they combed through the house, collecting evidence and taking photographs, they noticed details that raised questions. Carol's injuries were severe, the result of blunt force trauma. But the randomness of the supposed burglary seemed oddly staged. Nothing of significant value was missing, no cash or jewelry had been taken, and the violent nature of the attack suggested something personal rather than a random break-in. Initial theories began to shift. This was not the work of a typical burglar. Detectives began to dig deeper, interviewing family members, friends, and neighbors to piece together a picture of Carol's life and relationships. Fred Neulander, appearing devastated by his wife's death, cooperated fully, answering questions and recounting his version of the events leading up to that night. To those around him, Fred seemed a grieving husband, lost without his wife. But behind the scenes, investigators were quietly building a profile of Fred, a man who, despite his outward appearance, might have had something to gain from his wife's death. As the investigation continued, weeks turned into months with little progress. The case had gone cold, with no suspects and no solid leads. Carol's family, friends, and community were left with more questions than answers, haunted by the senseless violence that had taken her life. But in the spring of 2000, nearly 6 years after Carol's murder, an unexpected breakthrough would come from a source no one could have predicted. Len Genoff, the private investigator Fred had hired to carry out the murder, was struggling under the weight of his own guilt. Years of carrying the secret had taken a toll on him, and in a moment of weakness, he found himself confiding in a journalist. He revealed that he had been involved in the killing of Carol Neulander, hired by none other than her husband, Rabbi Fred Neulander. The journalist, realizing the gravity of this confession, brought Len's story to the authorities. With this new information, detectives revisited the case, examining Len's confession and the details he provided. Under pressure, and with nowhere to hide, Len agreed to cooperate fully with law enforcement. He shared everything: the planning, the money, and the instructions Fred had given him to make Carol's death appear as a robbery gone wrong. It was a shocking twist, and yet, as Len spoke, the pieces began to fall into place. The investigation now had a clear direction, and with Len's testimony, the picture became disturbingly clear. Fred Neulander, the respected rabbi and community leader, had orchestrated his wife's murder so he could pursue a life with his lover, Elaine Sonsini. The revelation rocked Cherry Hill and beyond, leaving friends, family, and congregants struggling to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the man capable of such a crime. As the investigation closed in on him, Fred's world began to unravel. The motives were undeniable: freedom from a marriage he no longer wanted, the chance to continue his affair with Elaine, and the life he envisioned without Carol. But the evidence against him was mounting, and with Len Genoff's full cooperation, authorities finally had what they needed to bring Fred to justice. Fred Neulander's carefully constructed life of secrets and deception had come crashing down. The community he had once led in faith and counsel now looked on in shock and betrayal as the truth emerged. This was no random act of violence, no simple robbery gone wrong. This was the calculated, premeditated murder of a woman by the person she trusted most. And as Fred prepared to face the legal consequences of his actions, the people of Cherry Hill were left to grapple with a question that would haunt them for years to come. How could a man of faith, a husband and a father, fall so far into darkness? With Lenjanov's confession, the truth of what happened to Carol Neulander was finally revealed, casting a chilling light on the man who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The arrest of Fred Neulander sent shockwaves through Cherry Hill and beyond. A man once revered as a moral guide and compassionate leader was now facing charges for the brutal murder of his own wife. As the trial date approached, the community braced itself for a courtroom drama that would expose the darkest corners of Fred Neulander's life. Friends, family, and members of the congregation watched with heavy hearts as a man they had trusted was put on trial for his wife's murder. The first trial began in 2001, nearly 7 years after Carol Neulander's tragic death. The prosecution painted a damning portrait of Fred, revealing his affair with Elaine Sonsini and his motive for wanting Carol out of his life. They presented evidence of his calculated actions, from the hiring of Len Janov and Paul Daniels to the precise instructions he gave them to make the murder look like a robbery. The defense, however, argued that Len's testimony was unreliable, contending that he was a man with questionable credibility who had confessed under pressure and the weight of his own guilt. One of the most heartbreaking moments came when Fred's children took the stand. Fred and Carol's son and daughter were forced to relive the painful memories of their mother's murder and confront the possibility that their father might be responsible. Their testimonies were filled with sorrow as they spoke about the devastation their family had endured and the toll the years of unanswered questions had taken on them. The prosecution also called on Elaine Sonsini, who shared the details of her affair with Fred, admitting that she had believed in his love but was unaware of the extremes he would go to for them to be together. Her presence in the courtroom added an emotional weight as the full scope of Fred's betrayal became evident to everyone present. Yet despite the powerful testimonies and mounting evidence, the first trial ended in a hung jury. The jurors could not reach a unanimous decision, and Fred walked out of the courtroom with a reprieve, if only temporary. The community was left in turmoil, divided by doubt and shaken by the uncertainty of justice not being served. But the state was not willing to give up, and in 2002, Fred Neulander faced a second trial. This time, the prosecution strengthened its case, presenting Len Janov's confession and the meticulous planning that had gone into the murder. The testimonies were once again emotional, with Fred's children bravely taking the stand to recount their experiences and the aftermath of their mother's death. They described their father's distant behavior, their grief, and the suspicion that had lingered over their family for years. Elaine Sonsini once again faced the public, her emotions raw, as she detailed the relationship that had driven Fred to such lengths. It was a story of betrayal and manipulation, of a man who had put his desires above the life of his wife and the well-being of his family. This time, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Fred Neulander, once a respected rabbi, was convicted of orchestrating the murder of his wife, Carol. The verdict brought a sense of relief to some, closure to others, and for the Neulander children, it was a painful validation of a truth they had long feared. During sentencing, the judge expressed the gravity of Fred's betrayal, not just to his wife and family, but to the entire community that had looked to him for guidance. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the courtroom emptied, the reality set in. Fred Neulander would spend the rest of his days behind bars, left only with the memory of the life he had destroyed and the trust he had shattered. For the Neulander family, the conviction marked an end to the years of unanswered questions, but it did not erase the pain. Carol's children were left to pick up the pieces of a life torn apart by their father's choices, grappling with a legacy of love tainted by betrayal. And for the people of Cherry Hill, the trial left a wound in their community, a reminder of how even those who seem most trustworthy can hide unimaginable darkness within. In the aftermath, Fred Neulander's story became a cautionary tale, a warning of how secrets and lies can lead to tragic ends. The man once known as a pillar of faith and morality would now be remembered as a man who sacrificed everything for his own desires, a husband who took his wife's life to escape his own deceptions. For those he left behind, the memory of Carol Neulander remains a haunting reminder of the life that was cut short, and the community that once looked up to Fred Neulander is left with only the shadow of what they thought they knew. The conviction of Fred Neulander sent ripples of shock and sorrow through Cherry Hill, a community that had once held him in the highest regard. Families who had once sat in the synagogue's pews, listening to his sermons and trusting his guidance, now found themselves grappling with a profound sense of betrayal. For years, they had looked to him as a source of wisdom, a man who represented their faith and the values they held dear. But now, as the truth of his actions came to light, the very foundation of that trust had been shattered. The congregation, Makor Shalom, once a thriving center of worship and community, was left reeling. Members of the synagogue were forced to confront difficult questions. How had they missed the signs? How had a man so deeply revered managed to lead such a double life? Many felt a deep sense of loss, not just for Carol Neulander, but for the loss of innocence that had accompanied Fred's betrayal. The synagogue itself would forever bear the scars of his actions, a painful reminder of the darkness that had been hidden within its walls. For those who had known Carol, the impact was even more personal. She had been a friend, a neighbor, a mother, and a wife who had devoted herself to her family and her community. Her death left a void that could never be filled, a sadness that lingered in the hearts of those who had loved her. In Cherry Hill, the memory of her kindness and warmth became a bittersweet legacy, a reminder of a life that had been cut short far too soon. As the community began to heal, many were left reflecting on the lessons that could be drawn from such a tragedy. Fred Neulander's story became a powerful reminder of the dangers of hidden lives and the devastation that deception can leave in its wake. People spoke of the importance of honesty, of facing one's problems rather than burying them beneath lies and secrets. Fred's choices had led him down a path of darkness, a path that ultimately cost him his family, his freedom, and the respect of the community that had once held him dear. The story of Fred and Carol Neulander served as a warning about trust and betrayal, about the fragility of the bonds that hold families and communities together. For many, it was a call to be vigilant, to remember that even those who appear trustworthy can sometimes carry hidden motives, and that unchecked desires can have consequences that ripple far beyond oneself. Today, Cherry Hill continues to rebuild, and Congregation Makor Shalom has moved forward, working to restore the sense of trust and community that had once defined it. But the memory of Carol Neulander remains, a quiet reminder of a tragedy that should never have happened, and a legacy that her children, her friends, and her community carry with them. In their hearts, Carol's life stands as a testament to the strength of love, the resilience of those left behind, and the importance of truth, no matter how difficult it may be. As we look back on this story, we are reminded of the choices we make, the lives we touch, and the powerful impact of trust and betrayal. Fred Neulander's story may be one of darkness, but Carol's memory serves as a light, a reminder to cherish the relationships that sustain us and to never take for granted the people who hold our trust. The tragic tale of the Neulander family serves as a stark reminder of the hidden complexities within seemingly perfect lives. What looked like a life of respect and stability was in truth built upon secrets and betrayal, ultimately leading to a devastating end that shattered not only one family, but an entire community. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe justice was served, or are there still unanswered questions? Share your opinions in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going as we reflect on the choices and consequences that lie at the heart of this story. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. We bring you more true crime stories each time, uncovering the real stories behind the headlines.